Mental illness often improves art. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Hope you're doing well. Great to see you as always. Get that coffee. Quick caveat, this review and book are not for those who are uninterested in a boiling cauldron of grotesque history, mythology, and commentary from one of France's most notorious and legendary avant-garde authors. I'm speaking of Antonin Artaud. Still with me? Great. Today is Heliogabalus, or The Crowned Anarchist by Antonin Artaud. Gorgeous. Gorgeous book. Look at that thing. Beautiful. This was a very kind gift from Infinity Land Press, a London-based publisher of what I describe as transgressive art books. In their own words, they provide exclusive clandestine publications which are inoculated against the circulatory system of the established book market. They're like the small press equivalent of an underground industrial noise band. So you're not going to find this on Amazon, but I've linked to their page in the description below. Check them out. But don't say I didn't warn you, it's not light material. So thank you very much, Infinity Land Press. I really appreciate it. Hats off to everybody involved. It's so nice to receive books as presents. Can you believe I do this for a job? Unreal. Very cool design work here. There's also collage work of an eclipse and these beheaded or warring Roman statues, you know. Pretty great. I love the way the book is set up. The War of Principles, Chapter 2. Oh, it's just magnificent. And you know, something I thought was really, really nice was that well, it's a great photo of him as well, but they also included a picture of the original publication from 1934, I believe. I'm not exactly sure when it was first published, but terrific. And Infinity Land Press is coming out with more work by Artaud, if you're interested, next year. Some of his early work and then his final writings, interviews and fragments from 1948, which was the last year of his life. They've already published some other Artaud, so if you're interested, I've linked to that in the description below. Check it out. Thanks. I've always wanted to read Artaud, but I never knew where to start. This is like a history book crossed with a transgressive novel in the form of an art book, with the aura of an occult text. And yet I've read that while it's Artaud's most extreme, it's also his most accessible. And some of it is complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. Artaud spent days in the library doing research as he wrote in Letters to Anarchist, included in this edition. The two were friends, which I found interesting. Antonin Artaud was a French theater director, poet, and actor. He was many things, it seems. He was actually in Carl Theodor Dreyer's Jeanne d'Arc, where he played a monk. He became one of the most important figures in theater in the 20th century, and also, I think, probably one of the most tragic souls that any of us have ever heard of. He's responsible for creating the form of theater, the theater of cruelty, which is outlined in the book The Theater and Its Double, which is something I've been meaning to read for years, probably a decade. Artaud had an unbelievably challenging life, it appears. After suffering sickness in childhood, he was placed in a sanatorium by his parents, and struggled with a hellish addiction, it seems, to opiates. He was part of the Surrealists until he was excommunicated, like another certain author I love. The Surrealists under, Breton turned into communists. Artaud was not interested in politics. Ever the rebel, he wrote "I shit" on Marxism. Okay, so now this book, Heliogabalus. Heliogabalus, or Elagabalus, was murdered at 18 and thrown in the river, along with his mother, after having been enthroned 4 years prior, in the year 218. He was a teenage Roman emperor, an androgynous, anarchic, unapologetic, murderous tyrant who remains historically infamous for, all sorts of things. At this point in the Roman Empire, in Syria, in the city of Mesa, which is where they are, they have a religion of sun worship, hence Helio, of the sun. Heliogabalus was raised by women with a direct political motive in mind. There's some controversy as to whether or not he was just a pawn and the scandalous details were fictitious. Exaggerated maybe, although from what I've seen and read, probably there's got to be some truth to it. It's not just a laundry list of debauchery, which is what one could get the impression that the book would be. Rather, the whole project is Artaud's mental condition finding expression in the historical representation of an insane Roman emperor. While, sure, a lot of it is probably exaggerated and rumor and blown out of proportion, and some of the more famous rumors and stories are actually excised from this book. They are not present. But by most accounts, he seems to have been a decadent lunatic. The history of Heliogabalus is dense and complex. All the bloodlines and families and violence and so on. I mean, not so much when you kind of get the major figures, the major characters behind Heliogabalus, the ones who were responsible for for pulling the strings to get him into power, and the reasons for doing so. Julia Mesa, the grandmother of Heliogabalus, seems to be, along with her daughter Julia Soaemius, behind the plot to install Heliogabalus as a Roman emperor, as a way of getting the family back in power. They were kind of ostracized when this guy named Macrinus came to the throne. What happened was Caracalla, who was the maternal cousin of Heliogabalus's mother, Julia Soaemia, was killed. Possibly by through the orchestration of Macrinus, who ascended the throne. Right, so Macrinus, through this death, which he may be responsible for, gets into power, and the family is shunned away from Rome, off to Syria, at Emesa. And Julia Mesa has plans to get back in, so to speak, using her daughter and her daughter's son, Heliogabalus. If you'd like a more detailed history of the families, the politics, and the religion, I've linked to a video below. It's fascinating, but way too much for this review. So there's this big plot, right? Get the family back in on top of the empire. And Heliogabalus is raised by women. There is a castrated general of some sort named Ganis, if I'm pronouncing that right, who is kind of his mentor and kind of foster dad, right? Who's sort of like his instructor. He's the one who's responsible he's the one who's responsible for kind of keeping him in line, trying to keep Heliogabalus from becoming what he came, because Heliogabalus eventually kills him. The battle at Antioch, which leads to the fall of Macrinus and leads to the establishment of Heliogabalus as Roman emperor, is astounding. Not only in the book, but just in general. Because what it's describing is like a 13 or 14-year-old kid on a horse who has been taught he's a sun god with a sword, leading an army to overtake this Roman emperor. And behind him, supporting him, pushing him forward, are his mother and grandmother, who are also fighting, right? So this is madness. This description is just unbelievable. While the two women attack the center, Heliogabalus, also mounted on a runaway horse, and followed by 1,000 Scythian cavalrymen, Ganis at his side, executes a wide wheeling movement, driving a sort of lethal wedge into Macrinus's flank. The Praetorian's fortress seems to tremble to its very foundations, shudder, thrash about like the head of a horse shaking itself. Already the sun is moved over. Heliogabalus, at the far end of the battlefield, and riding hell for leather at Macrinus's rear, receives full in the face the rays of the setting sun. Its radiance inflames him further yet. He now sees ahead of him, very far off, his mother's banners flying. A grievous moaning, sustained, prolonged, rises from the battlefield, above the smell of dust, blood, dead beasts, burnt leather, in a deafening din of clashing metal, where the harsh screams of the wounded fill every second. Shadows fall a long way across the ground, mingled with the sun's red rays, which spread out in immense trails. Macrinus the weak. Macrinus listens to the crescendo of the combat. He senses renewed and continued, in a manner unfavorable to him, that contest which seemed to him to be won. However, nothing is lost, but you need to hold your ground, and Macrinus can't hold his ground. He's not one of those who can. He's beset by panic. Heliogabalus' charging onslaught draws ever nearer. Hell of a thing. So they defeat him. God, what a passage. I mean, that was the most probably, energetic of the whole book. Because a lot of it is expository and a lot of it is his sort of commentary and kind of a history lesson, really. What's incredible is that within this study of the Roman Emperor Heliogabalus, Artaud actually begins to identify with him, this sun god king, self-proclaimed sun god king. Although he was raised that way, Heliogabalus was raised being told he was basically a god, right? Wearing these golden ram's horns or something like that. Artaud likens his own place in art as that of Heliogabalus. In his introduction of total chaos into a defined order, this explosive anarchy poisoning a system. which is what Artaud felt like doing himself, and in certain ways did. Not that he was a criminal like Heliogabalus, or near as debauched or excessive or whatever, but he was breaking down barriers in the theater. He was punk over 30 years before its conception. But Heliogabalus was a nutcase. I mean, really. Amid like castrating people and making sacrifices and pulling various pranks, prostituting himself, emphatically demanding a sex change, as well as killing, or having a main hand in killing, his foster dad / guardian Ganes, who was himself a eunuch, according to the book. There was tons of castration in ancient Rome. Why was he a eunuch? Well, I think it was like an honor or something. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, Heliogabalus fell out of favors with the powers to be, including his grandmother, I believe. And they murdered him, along with his mother. A famous rumor, one of the famous acts, of murder that is strangely absent, is the one where Heliogabalus smothered to death guests at a dinner with flowers. And there's a famous painting called The Roses of Heliogabalus based on it. Like they were released from above and smothered all the guests. Probably not. Another rumor was that he served 600 ostriches at dinner just for people to eat their brains. These are the more sensational ones, I guess. So while plenty could be hearsay and just shit talking, I feel there's gotta be some truth to the excess. As genuinely insane as the story of the other notorious Roman Emperor Caligula is, it's still believable in some ways compared to Heliogabalus, who just sounds like the physical manifestation of nihilism. I really enjoyed this book because I just sort of sit in awe of the past. Just like however crazy we think today is, just that what's happened previously is just unfathomable, To think that anyone that young could be placed in that position, to have that much power, that much freedom to do whatever, and quite cunningly by his mother and grandmother's manipulation, is unthinkable. Whether this is all historically true is really of no importance to Artaud. Whether he's true or not, the figure of Heliogabalus is alive, right through to his depths, I believe. Whether those depths are those of the historical figure Heliogabalus, or those of a figure who is myself. So he's directly identifying with him. Heliogabalus, in its conception, is part of Artaud's descent into madness. We could almost look at it as a projection of his psyche in an increasing state of turmoil. And 3 years after he wrote this book, Artaud was placed in an asylum. He was put in 5 different asylums over the course of World War II, and he was only released shortly before he died. It's a very sad story, but hell of a guy. Mental illness often improves art. I'm neither saying that mental illness is a good thing, nor that it's a requirement to create good art or art in general. I'm merely saying exactly what I said. Mental illness often improves art. The mind is forced to think differently, and sometimes that mind needs to be expressed. And sometimes it's done so well that those of us who are able to function receive a kind of cathartic release when we witness someone who has communicated the states of madness, places we're terrified to enter or recognize in ourselves, for very good reason, because they're dangerous. They upset the established order. But that's the power of darker art, such as Antonin Artaud. It's like Susan Sontag said, and put perfectly, in my opinion. The exemplary modern artist is a broker in madness. And that kind of creation, that kind of artistic output is often, it seems, directly at odds with a functional existence. Good for us, those who get to experience the art, not so much for the producer, unfortunately. Quite a unique read, better than food, no doubt. So what did I dislike? Well, it's not as much a narrative story as a mystical, occultish, historical commentary, with fragments of narrative and laden with personal philosophy. The historical, mythological, expository part is quite long. I think it's almost half the book. But in it you have all this stuff about the sun cults, sacrifices in Syria, and all this stuff. So while a lot of it is fascinating, sometimes it can drag a bit, but not that much. It's a little bit complicated getting the figures, kind of getting the families and the bloodlines and the characters all lined up so you know who's who and who's orchestrating what and why. It really does have some passages that require a slower gestation. Some of it definitely reads like the philosophy of Bataille, which is very poetic and emotional, and you kind of have to, I found that I had to really sort of sit with those lines for a while. And I never truly understood all of it, for sure, definitely not. And I probably won't with Artaud either. It's very personal philosophy. It's very internal. Not easily grasped, but very evocative. Very intense, for lack of better terms. So who should read it? This is for fans of Roman history and continental philosophy. And if you enjoyed Equus by Peter Schaffer, and Yukio Mishima, and the work of Hermann Nietzsche, and the philosophy of Georges Bataille, I really wouldn't hesitate to grab this one. The crossover with Equus is the theme of violent, barbaric religions practiced by young men who believe themselves to be a god. Or at least in the case of Equus, maybe Heliogabalus too, as a direct conduit to a god. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, welcome. Thanks for stopping by. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video, and I place their names in this mason jar, and I pull out a name for every review I do, and whoever's name I pull out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by one of the local roasters here in Portland, Oregon, right now. Usually roasted by me, but since the lockdown pandemic thing, for health reasons and just to support small businesses, I figure, why not send one of the delicious coffees from around here? So, if you would like to get in on that, you can head to the description box below, or go to patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood and donate $5 or more per video. For $1 or more, you will get access to the patron-only reviews, the Better Than Friday newsletter, the Discord channel, and you will get all these reviews ad-free. The newsletter is just filled with 5 different things I'm interested in at any given time. Could be books in the pipeline, music, films, changes week to week. If you think we have similar taste, I think you'll like it. Unfortunately, international shipping is not included. Thanks so much to all the patrons and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Robert F. Thank you very much, Robert F. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Heliogabalus by Antonin Artaud, plus some delicious coffee. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. In these times, it appears that the media, whichever side you're on, wherever you get your news, no judgment here, is constantly telling us that we are facing imminent death. So staying indoors and reading right now actually might save your life and some other people too, honestly. So I'll do just that. Maybe you will too. And if it doesn't work, then we'll die reading, won't we? Cheers. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please impale the like button, the sign of the Roman Empire that allows me to live in the Gladiator Stadium. Allow him to live. Wasn't Joaquin Phoenix such a bastard in that movie? He was great. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.